In today's video, are prices for condominiums holding steady, increasing, or in certain areas actually dropping a bit? Well, we're going to get into that and much more in this video. Hello everyone, this is Sam from SaberiSixRealEstate and Remax Realtron Realty Inc. As always, back with another video for you guys here today. Before we get into the point of today's video, as always, you can find my contact information in the description box with regards to my Gmail, my Instagram, and of course my office information and address. Feel free to get in touch with me with any questions you may have. With regards to any topics we've discussed in this video or in past videos, or if you have any general inquiries with regards to the Toronto/GTA real estate market, you can also check out my Google reviews as well. You can Google my name and check out the reviews and get in touch if you have any questions. Lastly, feel free to subscribe, comment, rate, and review. Always appreciate it. Anyways, let's get to the point of today's video, which is condo prices 6 days into March. At the time of recording of this video, it's March 7th. You might be watching this March 7th or 8th. It might be out on the 8th actually. Today's video is going to be somewhat of a continuation of the previous video where I discussed is the market softening a bit overall. And since that video was published, I've seen many of the things I discussed in that video actually come to fruition. And just to quickly summarize, in that video, I discussed how both based on the numbers and based on my experience working with buyers and sellers, in this regard mainly buyers, I saw that the market was softening just a tiny bit. Not to say it was all of a sudden a buyer's market by any means, but slowly we were making the shift towards a more moderate market. As I previously mentioned in that video, listing figures had gone up substantially, in certain cases doubling into February as opposed to January. Sales were not proportionately increasing. Furthermore, on top of this rush of inventory and low proportionate increase of sales, what we were also seeing was more failed bidding wars that were relisting at a higher price. So basically properties that did not sell at multiple offers and chose to relist or change their price to around market value, more of a straightforward approach that is very akin to a more moderate market. And moreover, properties that were selling at bidding were only selling with 2 to 3 competitive offers. Whereas in January, and I speak on this both from the selling side of things and the buying side of things, the properties we sold with 6 to 7 offers. Some of the properties my clients were interested received 6 to 7 offers. In certain instances, without any exaggerations, quite actually 15 offers for a condo, which I had never before seen. So I wanted to see what is the impact or has been the impact on prices. In this regard, only with regards to condominiums. I will touch on freeholds in a future video. And of course, this is not a perfect science, and I will go through some of the caveats that are very key. But let's go through the first 6 days of March within the city of Toronto, North York, Midtown, and downtown, and compare those sold prices to the first 6 days of February. Starting out with the city of Toronto at large, what we see is within the first 6 days of March, we see an average sold price of $808,000. Whereas in the first week of February, we were looking at the average sold price across all condominiums in the city of Toronto, excluding condominium townhomes, an average sold price of $788,000. Now, as I will touch on a bit further later in the video, averages are not the best measure, because sometimes when you do have a certain period where there is, for instance, $2 million transactions, as opposed to the previous period where there is maybe only $1.5 million transaction and everything else is below that, well, that's going to have an impact on averages. But in this regard, since we're looking at Toronto at large, the sample size is large enough in terms of the number of transactions that is not to be an issue. I think this is a pretty fair representation to say that first 6 days of March, when we take the larger scope, Toronto at large, the softening of the market has not been reflected in the prices as of yet. But of course, Toronto is a large city. It's comprised of different communities, sub-communities, different clusters of areas. Now let's turn our focus to an area that I have talked about extensively thus far in 2022, because this is one of the areas that has seen the greatest growth in the hot market that was in January and first 2 weeks of February. In other words put, this was the brunt of the competitiveness, the brunt of the $100,000 to $200,000 above asking sold, the brunt of 15 offers and 15 showings in one day. And that area was North York, where I, in a previous video, went through the numbers and established out of the 5 areas that have appreciated the most, 3 of them can confidently be said to belong to North York. Well, in North York, it's quite a bit of a different story, because when we look at the same exact sort of perspective in terms of month-over-month comparison with regards to the first 6 days, well, in the first 6 days of March, we see an average sold price of $782,000. We'll take this in the first 6 days of February, the average sold price was $825,000. That is a difference in average sold price of about $40,000 to $43,000. That's quite substantial. Now, am I saying that prices have dipped into first 6 days of March by $43,000? No. Once again, once I went through the transactions, there were a couple of outlier transactions that had an impact on the first 6 days of March being quite low and the first 6 days of February being quite high. However, accounting for those outlier transactions, this is pretty fair to the point, and I would probably have to put the price reduction in this area, insofar as the first 6 days are concerned, of course, around maybe $20,000. And why is that the case? Well, because as I said, when the market was very hot in January for all property types, but particularly for condos, the hottest of the areas was North York. And of course, when there's 10% on a weekly basis appreciation in a certain area, that's not sustainable whatsoever. And when things start to cool down and relax a bit, well, the first areas that are going to see that reflected in prices, in number of offers, in average asking price versus average sold price, is going to be the hottest areas. So it's actually not surprising to me that North York has cooled down a bit after the alarmingly hot start to the year. And on the converse of that, when we shift our focus to, for instance, downtown Toronto, which I've designated as C1 and C8, as always, the Treb maps available in the description box. Well, the reason this is the converse of that is because when we look at the average sold price the first 6 days of March versus the first 6 days of February, we see the prices have gone up here because there was a shift of demand from North York, which was blazingly hot in the first 2 months of the year, to downtown, which in relation to other areas was actually quite undervalued. Once again, referring back to that video I did about the top 5 areas that have grown the most in terms of condos, downtown did not crack the top 5 or the top 7. When the market has relaxed a bit and calmed down a bit, the hottest areas have been seeing that reflected in the prices, whereas areas that had not increased previously as much are now seeing a further increase of demand in terms of competition and average sold prices. Once again, this is not a clear science. As always, this is for a general audience, and when it comes down to actually buying and selling, these macro trends are good to get you started. But what's really important is really just looking at the building, looking at the unit, and doing more detailed and fine-tuned analysis particular to your unit type. Another area that has seen a dip in terms of the first 6 days of March as opposed to the first 6 days of February is Toronto East, representing an average sold price in the first week of March of around $707,000, whereas in the first week of February, we were looking at the average sold price of $758,000. Now, once again, the difference here is not a fair difference, right? You should not be leaving this video with a conclusion that prices are down in Toronto East by $50,000 almost. Because once again, I took the time to go through the transactions in the first 6 days of March, and what we saw was after February, where Toronto East condominiums were seeing an ample demand, what came onto the market in the latter half of February, more so the last week, and in the first week of March was much older depreciated condominiums. And that is a trend which is continuing today. I promise you, if you go through all the available inventory and try to search based on buildings that are 35 years old older, even 30 years old older, 70% of the inventory you'll see on the market today is in Toronto East. When this massive amount of inventory, older inventory, came from Toronto East, naturally, even in a very hot market, those are gonna have an impact of carrying down the averages. That in combination with the fact that, yes, once again, things have generally calmed down in Toronto East. So practically speaking, the difference isn't really $50,000 in terms of the market price dip, but it is fair to say that prices have dipped a bit into the first 6 days of March. It's gonna be very interesting to see if this trend continues, and freeholds are a different story. What I've noticed mostly in Durham, or Durham, and the suburbs of York region, portions of Toronto, is that freeholds in those areas have actually relaxed noticeably more as opposed to condominiums, which we covered in this video, and I will touch on that in future videos. And of course, as always, I say, I don't go purely based on the numbers. I work with sellers and buyers all over the GTA. So anyways, that is it for today's video. As always, feel free to ask any questions you have in the comment section, or you can find my contact info in the description box. Feel free to get in touch with me with any questions. Subscribe, comment, rate, and review. Your support in that regard is greatly appreciated. Thank you for watching. Stay safe and stay tuned. Thank you.